Number 10. Armor. Armor, aka Hisako Ichiki, is actually a pretty powerful X-Men, even in the 616 universe, who can create a psionic exoskeleton suit of armor. This exoskeleton is incredibly strong, durable, impenetrable, and it's fueled by energy from Hisako's ancestors in the 616 universe. But not in the Ultimate universe, no sir! In this universe, Armor's exoskeleton takes the shape of giant animals and even dragons sometimes. Oh, and also, in 1610, her exoskeleton is fueled by 10,000 mythological Japanese spirit demons. Like, how freaking awesome is that? Armor is cool and powerful enough that when the Ultimate Universe was destroyed, she was able to slip her way into the 616 Prime Universe, until she was kidnapped by Miss Sinister and eventually lost her life in X-Men Blue number 28 in 2018. Number 9. Firestar. Honestly, Firestar is one of those flame-wielding mutants that kind of flies over my head a lot of the time. Usually I think of Pyro, but in the Ultimate Universe, Pyro is actually not resistant to his own flames and therefore is covered in scar tissue and has like no nerve endings. But Firestar, in both 616 and the Ultimate Universe, is way cooler. Or I guess technically hotter, because fire. Ironically, her character actually had a huge phobia and hate of mutants, until her powers of microwave energy manipulation manifested, which seems to actually take the form of pyrokinesis in this universe. Her whole body can engulf in flames that she is thankfully resistant to. It allows her to fly and surprisingly burn things and people. Like when the super creepy Ultimate Wolverine tried to hit on her and she threatened to burn his nipples off. Number 8. It's Wolverine. I'm gonna be honest, this version of Wolverine is a bit alarming in terms of his morals and preferences, and just his behavior in general is just a bit less heroic than his 616 counterpart. But despite that, it is hard not to admit that he is quite the powerful character. His healing factor is a bit different than his Prime version and is called a survival factor. That means he can survive being torn in half, departed from his head, and even blown up by a nuclear bomb. He can also detect lies and still has an adamantium skeleton. He was trained by Weapon X as an emotionless assassin, but when the Brotherhood hired him to take out Xavier, he proves he is more than just muscle, overcoming his brainwashing and joining the X-Men, although it may have also been because he fell in love with the teenage Jean Grey when he was like 30.
Number 7. Marauders. Marauders has to be one of my favorite X teams we've had in a long time. They weren't always so amazing and heroic though. The Marauders was initially a name taken by Mr. Sinister's band of mutants, who were pretty evil. The same mutants behind the Mutant Massacre where many Morlocks were killed, and Angel, one of the original X-Men, got properly messed up. Poor Angel. Recently though, the Marauders' name was reclaimed by Kitty Pryde, now known as Captain Kate Pryde, the Hellfire Trading Company's Red Queen. Kate leads her Marauders team in an effort to fight mutant injustices the world over. Where there are mutants who are being kept from Krakoa or oppressed, her and the Marauders fight to free them. They also operate in trades, making deliveries the world over to ensure Krakoan-based goods and products like medicine and whiskey are delivered to Krakoa's trade partners.
Number 6. Asgardian X-Men. In What If number 12 from 1990, we get a little taste of what would happen if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard after their adventure during the Asgardian Wars in X-Men Annual number 9. Cyclops puts the X-Men to a vote, with the winning majority deciding whether to stay in or leave Asgard. Now Loki sent the losing majority home to Earth while allowing the winning majority to stay in Asgard. The result is an Asgardian X-Men squad that disperses among the Asgardian society, and it is so cool. Nightcrawler becomes a member of the New Warriors 3, or I guess 4. Sunspot becomes an Asgardian warrior, Danny Moonstar becomes a member of the Valkyrie, Ilyana Rasputin becomes the Enchantress, and above all of that and more, Storm becomes the goddess of thunder, with a version of Mjolnir becoming one of the most powerful versions of Thor in the comics ever. The X-Men becoming gods of Asgard with all the support of the already existing gods? Helheim, yes. Sorry, that's a bad joke, sorry.
Number 5. Age of Apocalypse. In the alternate reality of Earth 295, known as the Age of Apocalypse, the X-Men were one of the final superhero teams standing against the villainous tyrant known as Apocalypse. Of course, because it's his age. In this reality, many other superhero teams were wiped out and Magneto became the leader of the X-Men in Charles Xavier's stead after Professor X was killed when Legion traveled back in time and attempted to end Magneto. Charles put himself in the way of the kill shot, thereby dying dying and erasing Legion from existence, while also creating the Age of Apocalypse reality, where Apocalypse attacked Earth years earlier than in the main timeline. While Magneto's X-Men roster from this reality would change over time, the original roster consisted of Iceman, Storm, Colossus, Jean Grey, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch, of course. Really the only X-Men team the once mutant children of Magneto have ever been on. Later on, the team would be joined by AOA Wolverine, known as Weapon X, and Rogue, who would later also become Magneto's lover and eventually wife in this reality.
Number 4. Excalibur. Excalibur first appeared in Excalibur Special Edition number 1 by the legendary Chris Claremont and Alan Davis in December of 1987. They are a government-sponsored team of extraordinary mutants who fight for the people of jolly old England and their interests around the globe. The team is usually formed by British heroes and former members of the X-Men and was originally assembled with hopes to carry on Charles Xavier's dream and legacy, but their adventures usually deal with magical and interdimensional crises linked to the pocket dimension of Otherworld. The team right now is made up of Captain Britain Betsy Braddock and formerly Captain Britain Brian Braddock, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, Phoenix, Magan, Captain Avalon, Gambit, Gloriana, Jubilee, Richter, and Shatterstar. But the team has included awesome heroes like Black Knight, Colossus, Dazzler, Juggernaut, Lockheed, Moira McTaggart, Rogue, and Sage, and was reformed under Apocalypse as a mutant diplomatic organization in Krakoa, the UK, and in Otherworld. One of the best X-Men adjacent team variations ever, in my humble opinion.
Number 3. X-Force. In principle, X-Force should be one of the most powerful teams out there because they usually aim to kill. But there are some other teams on here that are known for having simply more Omega level mutants on their most powerful rosters, which is why I hesitated to put X-Force too close to the top, although they're pretty up there still. X-Force initially, though, started as Cable's team, who himself is known for being on the verge of Omega level, possibly the techno-organic virus being one of the main things holding him back from that status. The X-Force was originally Cable's Black Ops team, used for taking out those he deemed threats to the timeline, but would later become more known as Wolverine's team, and at one point was also Sabretooth's team. Currently in the comics, X-Force is actually more thought of as Beast, aka Hank McCoy's team, although Wolverine is still a major player on it. There was a recent incarnation of the team that included Omega level telepath Jean Grey on its roster as well.
Number 2. Multiversal X-Men. Gonna be honest here, this one's a little wacky. As an example, at one point the Kurt Wagoner on the team used a collection of hundreds of disembodied Professor Xavier heads to search the multiverse for a habitable planet for the population of Earth 12245. And then he teleported them all to that new world. That alone puts the team high on the list, but the other members just bring the team comfortably to the number 2 spot. A Wolverine that was Governor General of Dominion of Canada, who was in a romantic heroic duo with the demigod Hercules, who gave Wolverine adamantine bones, and who was also on the team. Emmeline Frost Summers, who was granted the immortality of a goddess. Catherine Pride, who goes by Shadow and is as equally powered as her 616 self. A genius disembodied head of Xavier, that's by itself. Corporal Scott Summers, who fought in and ended the American Civil War in 2 weeks, having dispatched about 6,000 Confederate soldiers, and regular old Dazzler. They came together thanks to the villain Savior, but fought against 10 evil Xaviers, including a Witch King and Cthulhu Xavier, that were trying to destroy reality.
Number 1. The Five. The Five have to be one of the most powerful mutant teams to have ever existed at this point in the main continuity, or if not, they would still have to be pretty high up there, I think. The Five are an offshoot mutant team whose job it is to make sure that all mutants are brought back to life. They were brought together to bring back all mutants who had ever passed on previous to the present time and age of the X-Men. Their ranks include multiple Omega level mutants, and they have literally mastered control over one of the most powerful governing principles of the cosmos, that of life and death. I know, it's pretty crazy. Their ranks include Hope Summers, Elixir, Proteus, Egg, and Tempest.
Coming in at number 10, we have the bloodthirsty Vampire Wolverine. In an alternate universe where vampires have launched an all-out assault on the United States, most of the X-Men are bidden and mind-controlled by the Lord of the Vampires, Dracula. Unfortunately for Dracula, however, Wolverine's healing ability allows him to regain his own mental control despite becoming a vampire vampire, and thus is able to overthrow Dracula and become leader of the vampires. Consumed by a bloodlust that amplifies his already pretty frightening rage, Wolverine and his vampire army are able to wipe out most other superpowered life on the planet, only finally being defeated by the combined forces of Doctor Strange and the Punisher as a vampire hunting combination. Coming in at number 9, we have the evil Iceman hailing from the Age of Apocalypse universe. In a world where Apocalypse has taken over mutant kind and only Magneto and a few X-Men are capable of fighting back, the usually optimistic Bobby Drake was forged into a heartless warrior, giving him much stronger control of his ice powers than other depictions of Iceman, and becoming a living streak of ice that can travel instantaneously through water. This version of Iceman would eventually betray his teammates and ally himself with Dark Beast, and was only eventually able to be defeated by having his head shoved inside of a furnace. Which I guess is one way to kill an ice-based villain, but geez, that's a little bit overkill. Coming in at number 8, we have the brainwashed Wolverine of Earth 14850. At one point in the regular Marvel Universe, Wolverine was captured and brainwashed by Hydra in order to assassinate the Avengers, but luckily was able to be deprogrammed before he did any real damage. On this alternate Earth, however, the deprogramming never took place, and Wolverine's killing spree of superpowered heroes was able to last for months. Armed with all of his incredible abilities, absolutely no remorse, and the addition of Hydra-developed teleporting technology that nullified even Wolverine's usual weaknesses, and this was a horrifying enemy that even the Avengers couldn't handle.
Number 7. Apocalypse's Horsemen. Apocalypse's Horsemen have featured many X-Men and many X-Men adjacent characters over the years. One of the more recent iterations of the team after Apocalypse was awakened following House of M and Decimation included Polaris as Pestilence, Gazer as War, Sunfire as Famine, and finally Gambit as Death. That's a good number of X-Men that he recruited that time around. Although Apocalypse and his Horsemen are generally opposed by the X-Men themselves, the fact remains that there have also been a good number of them recruited by Apocalypse himself. And in the Age of Apocalypse reality, more mutants have joined him than not. Even though he is still technically opposed by Magneto's X-Men there, many of the mutants we'd associate with the X-Men team in the main continuity end up actually joining Apocalypse instead in that reality. In fact, at one point, Wolverine even becomes the new Apocalypse in the Age of Apocalypse reality. Pretty wild, I know. Number 6. 10 Evil Xaviers. A few teams on this list aren't specifically made up of a copy 1-for-1 of evil X-Men, and this is one of those teams. It was simply too good for me to not include, so you're welcome. In the fantastic Extreme X-Men, this is a team of villains from alternate realities and even perhaps the main reality that our multiversal X-Men team led by Earth 616's Dazzler must face. The 10 Evil Xaviers feature one that is a cowboy, another that is a Cthulhu-like floating brain, one that is a giant Akanti whale, and so many more amazing weird alternates of the X-Men's leader and mentor. Number 5. Inhumans vs. X-Men. In Inhumans vs. X-Men, the X-Men team kind of become the bad guys. This was all thanks to the machinations of Emma Frost, who manipulated the rest of the mutants by making Cyclops appear as her own martyr. She made it appear as though Cyclops was killed by the Inhumans so that she could inspire the mutants to rise up against the Inhumans and basically go to war against them. In reality, the Inhumans did not actually want to fight the mutants and instead preferred to find a peaceful resolution initially. That was what they kind of wanted to do. They were like, we're sorry that we kind of accidentally killed some of your people, let's figure it out. But no. The conflict started when exposure to the Terrigen Mists ended up being deadly to the mutants, some of whom got very sick and then died, causing a case of Mpox. However, in the end, it was revealed that Emma was simply using her illusion powers to make people believe Cyclops was still alive after he'd already died almost instantly due to exposure to the Terrigen Mists. She then made people believe that Black Bolt had actually been the one to kill Cyclops, which was what got all the other mutants and X-Men riled up. Needless to say, after the truth came out and everything was mostly resolved, Emma went deep into hiding as a result of everyone being pretty pissed at her, which honestly, fair enough. Number 4. Revenants. Who are the Revenants? They're basically like, well, evil X-Men. Well, at least evil versions of a few of the X-Men. In an alternate reality where Cassandra Nova becomes ruler of the world, they may even have a ton more power over there. In fact, I believe they do. I think they rule that alternate world. Ugh. But the ones we're talking about here instead appear in Uncanny X-Force. X-Force, where they face off against some of the former current future X-Men members. Revenants are also known by another name though, one you might be familiar with if you are a Cassandra Nova fan or a Shi'ar fan: Mumadrai. The Mumadrai are basically evil duplicates of oneself. According to Shi'ar beliefs, in order to be born, one must first defeat their evil alternate, their Mumadrai, in the womb. That was what Charles did in order to defeat Cassandra Nova, his seemingly evil twin, who really is a Mumadrai. However, despite being defeated because Charles was so powerful, in reflection, so was Cassandra, who would end up recovering and returning years after that initial defeat. In Uncanny X-Force issue number 10, we're introduced to a few more Mumadrai that are the dark reflection of Betsy Braddock's Psylocke, Storm, and Puck. While Puck has never been an X-Men and isn't a mutant, he is X-Men adjacent, having served on Alpha Flight and X-Force, hence his appearance in this series and the reason why I'm still gonna talk about him on this list, so haha! Number 3, Curse of the Mutants. Curse of the Mutants represents a time and team that were turned evil by really the curse of vampirism. Well, at least a few of the X-Men were. Primarily, Jubilee was the one captured and transformed into a vampire as a means to lure out Wolverine. This was all part of Zarus', Dracula's son, evil plan to take over San Francisco and bring all vampires together under his control, of course. However, what Zarus was not anticipating was that Wolverine, who he successfully managed to lure out and transform, it seemed, had actually been caught and turned as part of Cyclops' master plan. Haha, he one-upped him with a plan that was part of his plan. In the end, the X-Men therefore managed to defeat Zarus, with Wolverine being reverted back to being human, or rather I suppose I should say mutant, and Jubilee being rescued, although for a time Jubilee would still remain a vampire. Number 2, Onslaught. I mean, if we want to get a little loose with the definition of a team, I would say a team is just more than one person, so I don't even think this is that loose, but then we could consider Onslaught to be an evil X-Men team. Technically, he was originally made up of a team of 2 people, Professor X and Magneto, both of whom have been known to lead the X-Men in the history of the comics. And while this psychic entity originally was only a combination of their 2 minds, when Onslaught returns appearing on Krakoa, it's actually because Onslaught is linked to basically everyone who has died and then been resurrected on the island. Basically, Onslaught managed to live on in Charles' psyche and then use his small, kind of sliver of existence there to make his way into each upload following a mutant's resurrection, thereby getting out little pieces of Onslaught all over until they could come together and make one giant Onslaught. So in essence, Onslaught is also a part of everyone who has died and been brought back to life on the Mutant Island Nation. This version of Onslaught as such poses an even greater threat to mutant kind and the world, especially as it creates and feeds off chaotic energy, infecting the mutants that it is a part of, but also feasting off of that chaotic energy as well. So, ugh. Number 1, Future X-Men. The Future X-Men weren't actually X-Men. That was the problem when it came to their evilness. That was all part of their evil plot. Although this mutant group advertised themselves as X-Men once they traveled back in time, in reality, we had later learned that they were indeed not X-Men at all, but instead were an evil future brotherhood. The team was initially formed by Charles Xavier II, the son of Charles and Mystique. He ended up recruiting the team to stand opposed to the X-Men, who Charles saw as a disappointment in regards to what his father had hoped for them. Charles II, that is, not the original Charles. While Charles II's team failed at defeating the X-Men multiple times, Reyes, Charles' half-brother, with Reyes' parents being Wolverine and Mystique, got the idea to travel back in time to when the X-Men would be more vulnerable in order to defeat them. Number 10, Dark X-Men. The Dark X-Men are basically what we get when Norman Osborn is put in charge of all the super teams that you can imagine. This all went down during the Dark Reign period over at Marvel Comics. Norman ended up becoming the world's greatest hero, at least in civilians and the government's eyes, after he successfully shot and killed Skrull Queen Varanki, in essence ending Secret Wars and in a weird twist kinda saving the day. Not something people usually expect with Norman Osborn. As a reward, he was given the task of creating a new organization to take over for the disbanded S.H.I.E.L.D. Norman created Hammer in response and made his own teams of both Dark Avengers and Dark X-Men. His initial roster included Dark Dark Beast, Mystique, Mimic, and Omega. I feel like Dark Beast is such a great evil mutant that he generally just gets to be on like almost every evil mutant X-Men team. But also, I love Dark Beast, so I'm kind of fine with that. I wish he was still alive though, so that at least I had some way to rationally explain Hank's behavior lately, who I thought might have been Dark Beast this whole time, but considering that Dark Beast is dead and everything else that's been going on, this now seems extremely unlikely, sadly. Dark Beast, please come back to save Hank from himself. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not click that subscribe button? I know there's a bunch of you that aren't subscribed, so I'm talking to you. Click the subscribe, do it. Do it, I say! Number 9. Avengers vs. X-Men. Some might argue as to who is really evil in this storyline, if anyone is, but then there are those that actually might see it the Avengers way. After all, in Avengers vs. X-Men, there are really two sides to take, although thankfully in the end, the two teams do manage to put their differences aside to come together and resolve the issue of what to do exactly with the Phoenix Force. However, in this story, the X-Men initially are opposed to the Avengers as they want to welcome the Phoenix Force back to Earth, which is reportedly rapidly on the approach. It's believed that the Phoenix is kind of coming to merge with Hope Summers. While the X-Men are kind of wary of that, they do feel more open to the idea of the Phoenix's return, feeling that they could maybe use it for good, whereas the Avengers are pretty much vehemently opposed as a result of the Phoenix's history of destruction. The Avengers, and perhaps rightfully so, would rather see the cosmic entity completely destroyed. As the fight ensues, the Phoenix is split into 5 pieces, and some of the X-Men are even corrupted later by its power, becoming known as the Phoenix 5. Number 8. Cerebro's X-Men. Cerebro ended up at one point gaining sentience and creating their own X-Men. The sentient Cerebro took the form of Professor Charles Xavier. Cerebro recruited their own X-Men to oppose the true X-Men team, or at least seemingly did. We'd later learn that this team, composed of Grey King, Rapture, Landslide, Crux, Mercury, and Zaos, were actually also imposters. In truth, being nothing more than nanotech lifeforms which Cerebro had built using personality templates that Cerebro had taken from within its own mutant database. Cerebro had wanted to oppose the real Xavier and the real X-Men, getting them out of the way so that it could successfully launch a satellite that would help it to locate and then catalog all mutants on the planet, freezing them in a cryogenic stasis in order to preserve their DNA. Yeah, cataloging mutants doesn't sound so bad until you realize that's what Cerebro wanted to do with them. After Cerebro's X-Men were defeated, Cerebro labeled them as failures before absorbing their digital bodies back within itself, becoming a giant monstrosity. Fortunately, Cerebro was defeated by the real deal in the end, Charles Xavier, and the real X-Men team. Number 7. Esme. Esme is one of the main Stepford Cuckoos. Well, I mean, I guess they're all pretty main, but you know what I mean. She's probably one of the most well-known, if we're talking offhand, about how many of the Cuckoos you can name. Esme and the other Cuckoos are basically like the children of Emma Frost, although as I've said before, not children that she had consensually. And I didn't say that before in this list, but if you've heard me talk about the Stepford Cuckoos and their relation to Emma, yeah. Instead, these were lab babies basically made from Emma's eggs that were stolen from Emma while she was in a comatose state. Esme, like the other Cuckoos, is kind of like a genetic clone as well as a child of Emma's, and Emma actually does consider the Cuckoos to be like her daughters. She treats them as though they were her own flesh and blood, and often her own responsibility, kinda stepping in to like play mom sometimes. Although she does give them freedom to make their own mistakes. I guess what I mean is Emma isn't known for being like a controlling kind of parent. She's like, I'm here when you need me, otherwise you do you. More recently in the comics, Esme, known for her diamond form and powerful telepathic abilities, teamed up and primarily dated young Cable. Well, technically all the Cuckoos were dating him at one point, though I would say Esme was basically the main squeeze of young Cable, and the sister that he was most taken by while he was dating all of them. And if you're like, whoa, how did that happen? The Stepford Cuckoos, they share things because they're kind of like a hive mind. So they're like, we'll just all date this person. It's cool. Also Krakoa. Everyone's dating everyone. Number 6. Akihiro. Akihiro is the son of Wolverine and his wife Itsu. Unfortunately, before Akihiro was even born, his life took a turn for the worse. Along with inheriting his father's powers, I think he also inherited some of his tragic luck. Wolverine has the worst luck, I think. His mother, Itsu, was killed before she could give birth to him, assassinated. The child was believed dead, but in reality he had been cut from her womb and possibly, due to his inherited healing powers, miraculously survived. Although, that's not clear, because usually your powers don't manifest until puberty, but sometimes your powers manifest when you're in the womb. I mean, look at Professor X with Cassandra Nova. Apparently that's a thing that happened. Akihiro would grow up and become a pawn of the villain known as Romulus. For most of his life, he'd also be known as Daken, a cruel nickname given to him when he was a child, being raised by his adoptive parents. The nickname was given to him because of his mixed race appearance, being part American and part Japanese. Though to be clear, his parents weren't the ones that gave it to him. It was people around his parents. Akihiro's powers are similar to Wolverine's, though his bone claws are a little bit different in terms of placement and appearance. Like his father, Akihiro is also known for being a skilled fighter as well. The apple does not fall far from the tree when it comes to fighting abilities. Number 5. Xandra Naramani. Xandra is Professor X's daughter, who is created out of his genetic material and that of his lover's genetic material, the Shi'ar Magistrix Lilandra Naramani, after both of them were believed dead. As such, Xandra grew up to become Shi'ar royalty and also spent a good amount of her life hunted because of this, with various parties attempting to use her for their own means. Xandra is an extremely gifted telepath. She can manipulate others' minds, read minds, and can create hyper-realistic telepathic illusions. Number 4. Ruby Summers. She was the X-offspring used in our oh-so-clickable thumb for the part 1 to this list, and although she was on my extended list for that part 1, my long brainstorm that I came up with, I didn't get around to talking about her because I kind of reached a point where there were too many Summers children on that list, and I was like, I don't want to make this a top 10 children of Cyclops. We got that list, and also that's not what this list is. What can I say? Sykes got strong genes. That's why Mr. Sinister is so obsessed after all and is known as the #1 fan of the Summers Club. Scott Summers is Ruby's dad in the alternate reality she hails from, and Emma Frost is her mother. This makes Ruby fairly powerful, not at the level of Hope or X-Man, but still pretty impressive. She's also super cool looking, which is an added bonus. Ruby hails from the alternate Earth of 1191, the home reality of famous X-Men ally Bishop. Ruby is also capable of emitting optic blasts like her dad and his brothers, but she has more control over when and how she emits these blasts, unlike her dad who's like, I literally need a visor. Ruby also comes with her Ruby form, which like her mother's Diamond form, grants her invulnerability and pretty much immortality. Number 3. Olivier Raven. Olivier Raven is legally known as Olivier Lebeau and is one of the alternate reality children of Gambit and Rogue. Honestly, I feel like there are not enough of these kids out in the multiverse. I don't know if that's just me. For a couple as famous as Gambit and Rogue, I mean, you would think that we'd have a lot more kids from them, at least through the multiverse. Though admittedly, I'm not quite sure that Rogue and Gambit are really the kid having type, at least from what I've seen in the main continuity. They seem pretty content with just having their fur babies right now. So maybe they just aren't super into having kids as a family. Olivier hails from the reality of Earth 41001, the reality of Gen Next, a group Ollie is part of. He has powers similar to his mother's, except he has better control over them and is able to choose when and how much power, life energy, and memories he absorbs via physical contact, or doesn't absorb in cases where he just, wants to make physical contact without using his powers. He can also absorb powers on a more permanent level, although he has less control it seems over when this happens. Like his father, he also seems to have some charm-based powers. Either that, or he's just charming. Number 2. Proteus. Proteus is the son of Moira McTaggart, who before I would count more as like an ex-ally, but with recent revelations, we can definitely consider her a member in the same way we might consider someone like Charles Xavier. It turns out that Moira herself was a mutant this whole time, possessing unique reincarnation powers. She has also been known for being a leader and teacher of X-Men groups before, including the time when she led a team that Professor X then recruited, sending them into Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. Not Krakoa as we know it now, but Krakoa as it was back in the day when it was like a monster island. Proteus is Kevin McTaggart, son of Joseph and Moira McTaggart. He is currently one of the 5 on Krakoa, and his powers as part of that team are mainly used to warp reality, allowing the non-viable eggs that Egg, formerly known as Gold Balls, produces to become viable for life. These eggs are then used to grow new versions of fallen mutants. Proteus is an Omega level mutant who requires hosts to survive. Initially, Kevin had a body, but now he's basically just pure energy. The hosts he controls and feeds off of eventually are exhausted and killed by that energy drain, making him not just a powerful psionic mutant, but also a powerful energy vampire as well, unintentionally. family. Number 1. Legion. Legion is the son of Professor Charles Xavier that was conceived when he had a love affair with Gabrielle Haller, which is where Legion gets his legal last name, as his given name is David Haller. Legion is so powerful because he suffers from a severe dissociative identity disorder, where he has more than 100 personas residing within him. Each persona has a number, many have names, and they each have their own specific power set that show up whenever they take over. Because of this, there is almost nothing that Legion isn't capable of. He can manipulate matter and time. We've seen him time travel and completely warp reality as a result of his possible abilities. He also has some pretty powerful hair, which I gotta say, I'm happy that he still rocks even now in the current modern day comics. He's still got that sweet hair. So tall. Number 10. Kristoff and Kadira Von Doom. Kristoff and Kadira Von Doom are the children of Storm and Dr. Doom. They come from the novel series X-Men The Chaos Engine, which is actually a trilogy wherein we explore what would happen if 3 great villains took control of the Marvel Universe, creating their own version of a perfect world using the Cosmic Cube. It starts off with Doom's variation on this world. In this reality, Dr. Doom has made Storm his wife, and she rules by his side as his Empress. The union of these powerful characters produces 2 children, Kristoff and Kadira. We can assume, of course, being the children of both Doom and Storm, that they would be physically, mentally, and demonstrably powerful when it came to their abilities, especially being raised by these 2 powerhouses. Also, if I wasn't clear about this is an alternate reality, so if you're like, when did this happen? It is not main continuity. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more children of the X-Men, they have a lot of kids if we, surf through the multiverse, so we could do it for you. If you want that part 3, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Nocturne. Nocturne is the daughter of Nightcrawler and Scarlet Witch. Obviously, not from the main continuity. In fact, Talia Wagner is known for being a part of a multiversal hero team, the Exiles. Nocturne is from the alternate reality of Earth 2182. In fact, back on her home reality, which first appeared in Millennial Visions, Talia is also known as a member of the X-Men team, fighting alongside her father, Nightcrawler, who is actually their field leader. She is a low-level telepath with incredible superhuman agility skills, the ability to wall crawl, and the ability to fire powerful brimstone hex energy bolts, something inherited from both her father and her mother. Nocturne's physical appearance is also similar to her father's, a bit demonic looking, and of course, blue. All my blue X-Men. Top 10 blue X-Men. Actually, I feel like there's a lot of X-Men that are blue. Or mutants that are blue, maybe? There's a lot of blue mutants, for sure. I don't know about X-Men team members. Number 8. Jimmy Hudson. Jimmy Hudson is the son of Wolverine from the alternate reality of Earth 1610. His powers are similar to his father's, but in this reality they're believed to work a little bit differently. As opposed to just being insane healing powers, Jimmy's power set in this universe as a mutant is believed to be based more in survival. So these powers aren't necessarily just about healing, but survival instincts and capability, meaning that Jimmy is just much better at surviving and evolving to survive than anyone else alive on the planet. And I mean that because in this reality, Wolverine eventually dies, so really Jimmy is the only one left alive who's really good at surviving. Jimmy Hudson has also been bonded to a poison before and gained control of his poison, which are basically alien-like beings resembling symbiotes in look and abilities, but ultimately a different alien race themselves, called poisons. So yeah. Jimmy is the son of Wolverine and Magneto's wife, Magda Lencher, although Wolverine urges him through a letter when the truth of his connection to Jimmy is revealed that he actually shouldn't focus too much on, who his biological parents are. Jimmy was raised by adoptive parents. His dad actually served with Logan in the war and agreed to look after Jimmy in his father's place, even giving the young boy his own family name. Hudson.
Number 7. Psylocke. Colonel Betsy Braddock of Strike is England's most powerful telepath, capable of reading minds, creating psychic grenades that explode in the minds of others, and one of her coolest powers, brandishing a purple psychic energy blade. She was once possessed by the mutant David Xavier, but she was strong enough to overpower him momentarily, which, if you know anything about him and his level of power, is not something to scoff at. When Colossus dropped a car on her, her consciousness was powerful enough to jump into the body of a coma patient named Quanon, kind of calling back to how Betsy and Quanon share a connection in the main 616 universe. Number 6. Rogue. Similar to her Prime Universe version, Rogue, or Marion Carlisle, drains the life force and absorbs the memories and abilities of others through skin-to-skin contact, with the caveat being that she can end someone's life if she holds on too long. Now, in the Ultimate Universe, it turns out doing this on a mutant to the point of hitting the end of the line will actually permanently transfer those powers over to Rogue. This happened twice. The first time was with Gambit. She drained his life force when he was already near the end after a fight with the mutant Juggernaut, and she gained his kinetic energy manipulation abilities, plus sometimes his accent. The second time she did this, she drained the powers of Juggernaut himself when he was near death, gaining his abilities permanently, giving her the strength to throw cars, the durability to withstand demolishing buildings, super speed, and limitless stamina. She would use those abilities to help the X-Men. Number 5. Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde, as we know her, is known for her ability to phase herself and others through solid matter. She also has the ability on Earth 1610, but in this universe she discovered she can also minimize the negative space around her atoms, becoming super dense and granting herself extra dimensional mass, giving her enough strength to smash through concrete and metal and punch Spider-Man through the air, making her as hard as diamond and able to withstand attacks from the Phoenix, and making herself weigh 90 tons at peak mass. But that's as well as her phasing ability, which can allow her to walk on air and water. And that's before her exposure to Giant Man Serum to fight Galactus that leveled her up even more, allowing her to increase in size and gain a healing factor. Definitely one of my favorite Ultimate X-Men, and not just because of her romance with Peter Parker. Alright, number 4, Storm. The Omega level mutant known as Storm has a little bit of a different backstory compared to her main universe counterpart. On 1610, Aurora Monroe was an immigrant from Morocco who was found by Professor X living in Athens, Texas, where she'd been stealing cars for a living. When she took a 1978 Mustang for a joyride, the police finally caught up with her, and Aurora used her powers to create a lightning storm to escape. Unlike her main universe counterpart though, she didn't have the training yet to control her powers to such a high degree, and put some children in danger when she summoned the lightning storm, which eventually allowed the police to catch her. Xavier sent Jean Grey to convince the Athens authorities that Aurora was actually an FBI agent and that she was sent to relieve them of the mutant, and she went on to join the X-Men. She is much more sarcastic and rebellious, and also had relationships with both Beast and Wolverine. She didn't just create storms, she created drama. Number 3. Iceman. In the 616 reality, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, was one of the original X-Men and has achieved the classification of Omega level with his powers of cryokinesis and hydrokinesis. Now, in the Earth 1610 reality, he is actually one of the youngest members of the group, and it's almost as if he was kind of given a power boost. I know that doesn't make sense. How can you like boost an Omega level character? You can't. But he wields his powers in more interesting ways. He has always been able to transform his body, but he also creates gigantic ice trolls and ice walls. He's proven his worth by stopping a Weapon X invasion and the Ultimates all on his own. Professor Xavier himself has claimed that Iceman is one of the 3 most powerful X-Men, and he's probably not wrong. But I do gotta say, I don't know what they were thinking giving him the do-rag. I don't get it. Number 2. Professor X. In the Ultimate Universe, much like in the main one, Charles Xavier was the most powerful telepath on Earth, possessing vast psionic abilities, and was known as one of the most powerful mutants ever. His mutant abilities give him telepathy, astral projection, and this version experiences some telekinetic skills as well, unlike his 616 version. He is also a genius with skills in surgery, therapy, and biochemistry. The only thing that I would say is both kind of a power boost and a bit of a caveat is the fact that while he's a good guy, he is also somewhat corrupt, or like very corrupt, as well as very manipulative. He willingly reads and messes with the minds of others, like Bobby Drake, who had a girlfriend when he first joined the X-Men who almost convinced him to leave the team, so Xavier erased her from Bobby's memory. It's kinda really messed up. He even created the mutant drug Banshee. Like, sure, he knows what he's doing is wrong, but that doesn't really make it okay, you know what I mean? And number 1, it's Jean Grey. Did you think it was going to be anyone else? As an extremely powerful telepath and telekinetic, she is already a pretty tough character to take on. But as almost all of us know, Jean Grey is the host for the Phoenix Force, and that still remains the case here on Earth 1610. Only, she seems to use even more of that power. Unleashing a small fraction of her power melted the armor of Apocalypse, but her full might against him tore him apart atom by atom, causing him so much pain Apocalypse begged her to stop. Apocalypse begged her to stop. As the Phoenix, she reversed time, read people's minds, saved the whole team multiple times, and took off into space, literally traveling to what was essentially heaven. There is a reason people fear Jean Grey, and the Phoenix Force gives them all the more reason to poop their pants.
Number 10. Crusader. Crusader is the daughter of X-Men team member Rogue and Avenger Captain America. I know, a weird combination. But in the reality of Earth 9811, these two ended up together after the heroes and villains on Battleworld decided to call a truce. Remaining there, they settled down and raised families, putting their differences aside. I'm not sure how their relationship worked, with Rogue not really being able to touch people and all at this point, or how she had a child considering that, but perhaps, like on Earth 616, she eventually was able to work through the trauma causing this side effect of her powers. Or perhaps the Captain America of Earth 9811 was immune to her involuntary energy and power draining effects. Either way, Sarah is their daughter. She gets much of her power from her mother, or rather she gets much of her power from the power her mother had absorbed in her day, meaning that Sarah is super strong, durable, and can fly. She is also considered worthy enough to lift Thor's hammer and wields her father's shield. Number 9. Wolverine. I really wanted to put Laura Kinney higher up on this list because, well, I love her so much, but unfortunately the psionics are just always pushing some of my favorite and most powerful characters further down on these lists. Those psionics. Oh well. Laura Kinney as X-23 and now Wolverine is still one of the most powerful children of the X-Men around. Some argue that she is more clone, while others argue that she is more biological offspring of Logan, but in reality, she's kind of a bit of both. She was created as a female clone of Wolverine after his genetic material was combined with that of her creator, scientist Sarah Kinney. Sarah noticed that there were damage spots basically in the samples of Logan's genetic material that they had, which was why their cloning process had been unsuccessful up to this point. And so she used her own genetic material to patch those rough spots, which made Laura a female clone. Sarah was forced to carry Laura to term as a surrogate by her jealous colleague Xander Rice, as punishment for even creating the female clone to begin with, a strategy that admittedly had not been approved. Laura has powers similar to her father. She has a regenerative healing factor and was also trained from birth to be a skilled fighter, bodyguard, and assassin. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about more children of the X-Men, there are a lot out there in the multiverse. Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Chimera. Chimera is the daughter of Storm and likely Black Panther, who hails from the alternate reality of 13729. Yeah, sadly Storm and T'Challa have never had a child together in the main continuity. I know, it's a bit of a bummer. Unless they had like a real secret child that we just don't know about yet, but I doubt it. Chimera seems to have inherited the powers of her mother, but also shares a connection to the Earth, which allows her to draw on and harness its energy. She is also a skilled tracker and can communicate telepathically with animals. I'd also assume, as she's the daughter of Storm, that she's a skilled combatant as well. As while Storm is more well known for her goddess status and weather manipulation powers, she is also an extremely skilled fighter. And if she's Black Panther's daughter, then she should definitely be a skilled fighter. I mean, you got two amazing parents that are both amazing fighters, so just saying. Number 7. Great Ring of Arakko. The Great Ring of Arakko is exclusively made up of Omega level mutants, which really tells you how much of a powerhouse team they would be. They are the ruling body of Arakko, which is the sister mutant island nation to Krakoa. In fact, Arakko and Krakoa are kinda like less siblings and more romantically tied. Ooh, romantic islands that are in love with each other. Both are sentient mutant islands, and for a long time they were actually attached to one another, literally and romantically, and were also in love with each other. Although now, they actually prefer to be separate. They've been separate for a long time and they're like, you know what? The spark, it's gone. Arakko's ruling government has 4 distinct sections, which govern different parts of their civilization, with some areas having more power at given times. For example, in war times, Dawn is the area that typically gets more say, as this is the area that Dawn rules over and governs. The war times. For years, the Iraqi were at war with Amenth, so this would have been a very prominent section for many years in the past in terms of their their ruling body. And it's something that the mutants of Arakko struggle with releasing themselves from, the obligation to always be on guard and kinda always be at war with people. While Uranos recently cleaned the clock of the Great Ring of Arakko, that should not undermine their strength, as Uranos is basically on a whole other level by himself as one of the most powerful, ruthless, and I would say evil Eternals that we've ever seen. And I know people would probably put the X-Men above the Eternals or mutants above Eternals, but let me tell you, the Eternals are still pretty powerful, so we gotta respect. Number 6. Versus Inhumans Unity Team. Inhumans versus X-Men was an interesting time, to say the least. We basically had to come up with a reason for these two groups to fight one another, which we did by making the mutants deathly allergic to Terrigen mists, which had actually been released around the world, which ended up killing, a lot of mutants. As a result, Emma Frost made a martyr out of Cyclops, using him to propel forward her own plot to eliminate the threat of the Inhumans. She ended up being one of the main leaders of this team, which was sort of a unity squad, bringing together all mutant-related X-teams, primarily Magneto's X-Men, an X-Men team with past versions of the characters, and a more current X-Men team, in addition to some other mutants who have served on X-Men teams before. Number 5. Swordbearers of Arakko. I mean, when you consider the Swordbearers of Arakko, we're all pretty much kicking the champions of Krakoa's butts, kinda have to put them high up on this list, right? Well, the Araki are newer when it comes to the mutant status quo, and what we consider to be, an X-team, considering we kinda just met them, and they are loosely tied to the X-Men through both their connection to Apocalypse and, being mutants. At the end of the day, they are still mutants, and for that reason, I think we can include them on this list, because this list for me is really more about mutant teams. That's what it's really about, more than, specifically X-Men sister teams or X-Men rosters, which we could do, but I don't know. I feel like to me that's a different list. We just use the name X-Men here because it makes more sense in relation to Marvel mutants, and is more appealing than if, we just put Marvel mutants in the title of this video. You dig me? The Swordbearers of Arakko didn't just best their Krakoan competitors in contests of combat and wit, but also in some of the more charismatic and just straight up strange contests. Also beating them in a dancing competition, a runway model one or a fashion show contest, and a scavenger hunt, to name a few of those seen in X-Force issue number 14 of that 2019 series, during the 10 of Swords event. Oh man, I love 10 of Swords. Number 4. The Five. The Five have to be one of my favorite teams to this day. They also in essence stand to represent this current era of X-Men, which seems to sadly finally be coming to a close. Oh no, I'm going to be so sad to see it end. I'm not ready to say goodbye. I'm gonna need a box of tissues whenever if we do a video about that. Oh gosh, I'm gonna be crying the whole time. The Five are iconic in this way because they represent the power mutant kind now holds, the power over life and death. Mutants can resurrect other mutants, and not just that, they can resurrect other people as well, as it turns out, non-mutant people. So they don't just decide who lives and dies in regards to other mutants, but can also pass this judgment on to all the people of Earth. The Five are the team that allows this to happen. They're led by Hope Summers, and the roster includes Egg, Proteus, Tempest, and Elixir. Together, these 5 teammates can resurrect mutants by creating eggs and imbuing those eggs with life, growing clones of mutants who have died, and using their powers to not just recreate them physically, but also to recreate them on a genetic level, giving them back their powers and even modifying them to be as they were in real life. For example, Wolverine having his adamantium-coated skeleton, which is not part of his powers, but something he got later in life, they can do that and also give him those sweet adamantium claws. In addition, the Five also use backups Professor X keeps on Cerebro for all mutants to restore their memories as well, so that they are in essence the same person who died recently. Although the question of what this means for their soul is still something that I think we're considering, and I wonder if that will have repercussions after we end this era. Who hasn't died? That's gonna be the real question. Who hasn't died yet? We should do a list on that. Number 3. Extinction. The Extinction team truly is a scary one. They were around at a time when the Phoenix Force was believed to be returning to Earth. It was thought that the Phoenix Force wanted to merge with mutant messiah Hope Summers and have her act as its host. While the X-Men were more optimistic about the Phoenix's return, the Avengers were not so optimistic. As a result, the mutants deployed their own team to fight against the Avengers, but which was initially also created to defend the mutant island of Utopia and, honestly, the world against extinction level threats. Hence the name, the Extinction Team, you know what I mean? The Extinction team included Cyclops, Magneto, Namor, Storm, Dagger, Magic, Hope Summers, Emma Frost, and Colossus. Talk about a powerhouse lineup. Never mind the Phoenix Force, this team in and of itself seems frightening enough to justify the Avengers' concern, assuming they don't trust the mutants having power, which, while at times both teams have been allied, has always seemed to remain a bit of a touchy subject to the Avengers, who have a history of not playing well with other major superhero teams in the Marvel Universe, to be honest. In fact, they also even have a history of not playing well with each other within their own team. So, yeah. Me just throwing shade at the Avengers. Number 2, the Phoenix 5. 5 seems to be a magic number when it comes to the mutants. While the 5, as they are simply known, are all about life and resurrection, the Phoenix 5 have the potential to just straight up destroy worlds. Or I suppose they could also save them, if they can avoid being corrupted by the Phoenix's power, that is. The Phoenix 5 are what some members of the Extinction team become after the Phoenix Force arrives on Earth. During a fight with the Avengers, the Phoenix Force is split into 5 pieces, when Iron Man attempts to destroy it. These pieces end up merging with 5 hosts, creating the team we know as the Phoenix 5. Of the Extinction team, Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Magic, and Colossus are the ones who end up as the Phoenix's hosts, dividing the team. While initially the members of the Phoenix 5 attempt to use their newfound power for good, they all end up kinda getting corrupted, with other members also stealing their power until it is all combined into one host, ending with Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. We all know how that went. Professor X ended up as a dead guy. Number 1, X-Men. Obviously, one of the best and most powerful around has to be the X-Men. I mean, come on. Of course I'm gonna pick the X-Men. I mean, is it too obvious? I don't know, but it's true. And I would say we've actually had one of the best X-Men rosters in recent years, with the previous roster that included Jean Grey, Cyclops, Synch, Lara Kinney's Wolverine, Rogue, Polaris, and Sunfire. While the team has had many different rosters throughout the years that have been standout, Jerry Dugan's team was pretty stacked, especially when you consider you have 2 people that can use other people's powers, one of whom can sync with anyone else on the team. And the current team as well is also fairly stacked, especially with Bobby returning to the main X-Men team and him being a pretty unstoppable force as an Omega level mutant. I mean, honestly, I think Iceman, if he was just a team, he could be a one-man team. That's how powerful he is. If we also considered amassing all the X-Men that had ever served to make one giant super team, then the X-Men would also definitely be the most powerful, as they've had so many members rotate on and off the team throughout the years. Even the team from the classic era, still being younger too, at the time that is, they're not as young now, were pretty powerful. And then of course there were the 80s and the 90s for X-Men, which also saw a lot of really powerful lineups, to be honest, with Kitty Pryde, Logan's Wolverine, Rogue, Havoc, Polaris, and even powerhouses like Magneto and Rachel Summers joining the team. Rachel Summers herself could also be a one-woman team.
Number 10. X-Men 1602. You know I gotta talk about this Neil Gaiman and Marvel collaboration yet again. One of the central conflicts within Marvel's 1602 story is the subject of witchbreed, in other words, mutants. This story takes the adversity that the regular X-Men face in modern times and amplifies it to about 10, having the mutants be the main victims of this timeline's Spanish Inquisition. Mutants are hunted down and treated in the most horrible medieval ways. Standing against this horrible treatment were a version of the X-Men led by Carlos Javier, or this Earth's King Charles I, who refers to them as Mutantur, or Changing Ones. The team was made up of Warner, aka the Angel, Henry Hal McCoy, Brother Petros and Sister Wanda, Scotius Summer Isle, Roberto Trefusis, and the wee apprentice John Grey. Now, this may be a basic team of X-Men, but all of these characters are very powerful in their own right, and in an Elizabethan world that can barely even comprehend them, with limited technology to even oppose them, they're even more powerful in retrospective.
Number 9. Giant Size Little, or Earth 71912. Formerly known editorially as the X-Babies, the X-Men of Earth 71912 are an alternate multiversal version of the X-Men as created by Scotty Young and Guri Hiru. Young's take on the Marvel Universe generally sees famous teams reinvented as little kids, like in his original take on Avengers vs. X-Men, where baby teams of Avengers and X-Men fight one another over a teddy bear named Bucky Bear. While they were once babies, this X-Men team has seemingly grown up a little bit at least, appearing as young children now. We also see this version of the X-Men and various mutants mutant heroes and villains appearing in the Infinity comic written by Scotty Young, Giant-Sized Little Marvels, with art by Dax Gordine. While this team is technically just kids, that doesn't mean they aren't capable of making powerful moves. It just means that their world is governed by more kid-like and kid-friendly rules and confines. However, I have no doubt that the giant-sized little X-Men could still kick butt in other universes as well, should they need to. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, please head on over to Facebook, where you can also show us some love by clicking that like and clicking that follow and all of the Facebook stuff.
Number 8. X-Men 2099. As the fourth incarnation of the X-Men in this universe, with basically no connection to classic characters or plot threads other than being inspired by the ideas of Charles Xavier, the nature of the 2099 X-Men team created by John Francis Moore and Ron Lim, first appearing in X-Men 2099 #1 in August of 1993, makes them one of the most creative and interesting versions of the team ever. The team comes together at the end of the 21st century, led by Desert Ghost, who has the ability to break down molecular structure with his left hand and heal even lost limbs with his right hand. He had a vision for a new future for mutant kind, and his team is made up of completely new characters like Cerebra, who has the abilities of Cerebro basically, and the ability to manipulate a person's nervous system, or Skullfire, who had ambient energy particle absorption. All the members of this X-Men team have unique powers to take on the grim corporate rule future of this timeline.
Coming in at number 7, we have Basilisk, the twisted, mask-wearing variant of Cyclops. On an alternate world where anti-mutant sentiment is somehow even higher than the regular Marvel universe, Scott Summers' backstory is made even more tragic. Killing 7 people, including his own parents, when his powers first manifest, Cyclops is locked away in the prison Alcatraz and forced to wear a mask made of ruby quartz to control his laser vision. The evil governor of the prison even goes so far as to mutilate Cyclops and remove his eyelids, making the twisted basilisk mask the only method Scott has to control his deadly abilities, a favor that Cyclops would repay by killing the governor and launching a prison break that would eventually lead him back to this universe's X-Men. Coming in at number 6, we're taking a bit of a break from the comics with the Wolverine symbiote from the video game Spider-Man: Web of Shadows. In this game's story, Wolverine has traveled to New York City to deal with a growing symbiote infestation and even briefly fights Spider-Man when he believes the wall crawler is actually Venom. Unfortunately for Wolverine, he finds himself overwhelmed by actual symbiotes on top of a church and attacks Spider-Man again as the Wolverine symbiote. With all of his usual healing abilities on top of all the usual symbiote enhancements, this version of Wolverine might just be the scariest he's ever been. Coming in at number 5, we have the Ultimate Universe version of Jamie Madrox, aka Multiple Man. Multiple Man's powers have always been a bit overwhelming, with the ability to seemingly create an unlimited amount of duplicates of himself as long as they're generated one at a time. In the Ultimate Universe, however, this power was pushed beyond its limits when Jamie allied himself with the Brotherhood of Mutants and created tens of thousands of bomb-wielding versions of himself with no regard for his own life. While the Ultimatum event featured many shocking moments, few are as existentially disturbing as literal thousands of clones strapping explosives to themselves just to wipe out several superhero bases. Coming in at number 4, we have the possessed Professor X from Earth 6141. During the event known as M-Day, when Scarlet Witch wiped out most of mutant kind, the extremely powerful telepath known as the Shadow King was able to escape the loss of his powers by transferring his mind through the multiverse to the alternate world of Earth 6141, where he was able to successfully possess the mind of this world's Charles Xavier before the X-Men were even formed. Combining both of their telepathic might, this version of Xavier turned all of his students into perfect killing machines, and placed them firmly under his psychic control, getting them to kill any superheroes who tried to interfere in the Shadow King's schemes. While eventually defeated by the team known as New Excalibur, this group of Shadow X-Men left their world shaking in terror. Coming in at number 3, we have the vampire variant of Storm, aka Bloodstorm. In an alternate reality where Storm was bitten by Dracula before discovering the X-Men, Storm came to Charles Xavier for help with her condition. Unfortunately, her bloodlust was too strong and she wound up feasting on both the Professor and Beast. Horrified at what she'd done, this version of Storm would eventually try and redeem herself after she found herself as part of an invasion force attacking the main Marvel universe. While she eventually bonded and made amends with the Beast of this dimension, her combination of weather controlling and vampire powers made Bloodstorm one of the more powerful X-Men variants that the regular X-Men have ever had to face. Coming in at number 2, we have one of the most powerful enemies the X-Men have ever seen with Brother Mutant. On Earth 127, a male variant of the Scarlet Witch, known as the Scarlet Warlock, attempted to cast a spell that would transfer Wolverine's adamantium skeleton to Magneto, thus giving Magneto an incredible power boost given his magnetic abilities. However, something with the spell went wrong, and the Scarlet Warlock, Wolverine, Magneto, Quicksilver, and the villain Mesmero were all merged into a singular being known as Brother Mutant. With all 5 of these mutants' powers combined into one villainous figure, Brother Mutant was such a powerful threat that a multiversal team of Wolverines had to be assembled specifically to stop him, just to ensure that all of that power wasn't unleashed on the rest of the Marvel multiverse. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the one and only Magneto from the Ultimate Universe. Unlike a lot of the other entries on this list, this Magneto variant doesn't have any additional powers or physical mutations to make him even more intimidating, but rather is terrifying just because of his sheer willpower. This version of Magneto is much more cynical and dark than the complex figure of the regular Marvel universe, and when he believed his children had been killed by Doctor Doom, Ultimate Magneto was furious enough to begin a global genocide. Switching the polarity of Earth's poles with his magnetic powers and beginning the incredibly controversial event known as Ultimatum, this version of Magneto caused the deaths of millions of people and dozens of beloved superheroes, and was only finally able to be stopped when Cyclops put him out of his misery with a laser blast to the head.
Number 10. X-Force. X-Force is known for being one of the most ruthless mutant and X-Men related teams in the comics. It was initially more Cable's team and was used like a sort of time police force to remove threats to the timeline. However, as time went on, the name became repurposed and is now more associated with someone like Wolverine, known for being a sort of mutant black ops team, usually that he leads. Currently, Krakoa is equivalent to America's CIA, and in fact very currently, as of right now in 2022 at the time of this recording, the team is more Hank McCoy, Beast's team, which has recently moved out of the shadows, with Beast deciding to no longer basically hide all the morally questionable, super shady decisions that he's been making to eliminate threats and keep Krakoa safe. Although sometimes it seems like his true aim may actually be something more sinister, because it is an interesting way of trying to keep people safe. And friends, before I move on to my next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love the X-Men, then we have a playlist for you. It's our X-Men playlist. Go check it out and you can watch all the X-Men content that we've done. We've done a lot. Number 9. Brotherhood of Arakko. There have been a couple of X-Men red teams over the years in Marvel Comics, but for the purpose of this list, we're focused on Storm's Brotherhood that she brought together during her time as ruling regent out on planet Arakko, formerly known as Mars before the mutants terraformed it and claimed it for themselves and their people. They appear mainly in the book X-Men Red, which is why I'm referring to them as kind of like X-Men Red, though really the title for this book is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to Storm's team. Well, you could call Storm's Brotherhood this book's main team, and thus X-Men Red because that's the name of the series. It seems initially this was more in reference to the team Abigail Brand tried to put together, but kind of failed to really have takeoff, with Storm's team taking prominence instead. The team initially consisted of Storm, Magneto, the Fisher King, and Sunspot, but now that Magneto is gone, also includes Cora the Burning Heart and Wrongslide. Also includes Cora of the Burning Heart and Wrongslide, a resurrected Rockslide who Rogue came back different after he was killed in Otherworld. Number 8. Avengers Unity Division. The Avengers Unity Division is basically a combination of X-Men and Avengers, which makes it pretty OP. At least it was a combination of both these teams when it first started. The team was created by Captain America as a result of the Avengers vs. X-Men storyline. After the fallout, Cap felt pretty bad about basically not really helping the mutants more in regards to promoting them towards humanity, and making sure that the world over did not really hate and fear mutants. At least, you know, he felt as responsible as he, as one man, could do. But he's a pretty influential guy, so he was like, maybe I should have been helping you guys more. In an effort to do this now, he decided to bring together Avengers and X-Men to work together, creating the Avengers Unity Division. Later on, Inhumans would even be added into the mix as well, so really this team is all about bringing people from different worlds who maybe don't always see eye to eye together, which is a really beautiful sentiment when you think of it. On the initial team, which was known editorially as Uncanny Avengers, we had Captain America leading and joined by Havoc, Thor, Rogue, Scarlet Witch, and Wolverine. Rogue and Scarlet Witch were an especially challenging combination of characters to have on this team, as Rogue vehemently hated Wanda for what she had done to mutants during House of M, and saw her basically as a villain. In fact, most mutants did at that time, so this was in general a powerful team on paper, but one that also came with like a lot of issues and a lot of baggage, to be honest. Of course, that's what makes it so interesting to read, right? We're here for the drama.
At number 7, we have Professor Drake. Old Man Winter over here proves single-handedly that there is still hope for those of us who can't grow a beard. But who is the Ice Master, you ask? Well, simply put, he's the elderly future version of our favorite Iceman, with a new fitting superhero name to match his wizard-like appearance. See, fashion doesn't get much better in the future, so Ice Master makes do with his cloak. But the most notable difference, besides the beard of course, is how the Ice Master is able to more effectively channel his ice powers thanks to that ice spear of his. Man, if I had $1 for every time I said ice. Ice Master only really comes around with his presence as needed in the past, like that time he came from the future to the present to tell his younger self to give up fighting, as it only leads to a dark future. Iceman ain't too convinced, and the two even duke it out against one another. But they don't stay at each other's throats for long. In fact, during the second issue of Battle of the Atom, we get to see Iceman across 3 different eras fighting alongside each other. But regardless of which era we're talking about, I'm sure a lot of us can agree that Ice Master is the coolest. Ice cool, that is. At number 6, Planet X Rogue. The version of Rogue we get in Uncanny Avengers is probably the most powerful Rogue we've ever seen, and yes, that includes the countless versions of her imbued with the Phoenix Force. After taking a fatal blow that led me to believe that she expired for like half a dozen issues, she played a crucial role in thwarting off a celestial attack by absorbing the powers of every X-Men and Avenger available. We're talking hundreds of superheroes here, imbuing her with what's basically every superpower at once. And these powers ain't from lackluster players either. We've got some big names here like the Hulk and Wonder Man, just to name a couple. She becomes so insanely powerful that she's able to single-handedly slow Exitar's descent to Earth by pushing up against the bottom of his foot, and when Death Sentry held the other foot, Exitar was halted completely. Like, come on, you don't think that's epic? Sure, she couldn't stop him on her own, but come on, this dude is big enough to size up our entire planet, for crying out loud. His shoe size is bigger than Rhode Island. Need I go on? At number 5 is Bloodstorm. This version of Storm from an alternate reality is very similar to her canonical 616 counterpart, save for the fact that she was captured by Count Dracula in an attempt to turn her into his bride. And after becoming the vampiric Bloodstorm, she easily overthrew the Count and helped the X-Men defeat him. However, she ultimately decided not to return to the X-Men on account of her vampirism. She was later imprisoned by some of Dracula's disciples, and while attempting to escape, Monroe was confronted by one of her former teammates, Kitty Pryde, who attacked Bloodstorm as she'd rather see her friend perish than be a vampire. But Kitty hesitated at the last second, falling prey to Bloodstorm as her first victim. There's also a Bloodstorm from an alternate reality in which she was captured by Dracula first before joining the X-Men, where her bloodlust sadly overpowered her, resulting in her taking a big ol' bite of at least both Beast and Professor X. This reality's weather-controlling vampire proves without a doubt that sometimes the best way to improve a character is by adding fangs. At number 4 is Belasco, and no, I'm not talking about the supervillain. I'm talking about the X-Man who became the supervillain in an alternate timeline, that X-Man being Nightcrawler. And if that sounds a bit convoluted, you ain't heard of nothing yet. You see, the events of this timeline closely resemble that of Earth 616. That is until Nightcrawler loses his arm in battle and is forced to teleport to safety. Unfortunately for him, thanks to some Terrigen mist, some weird opposite day stuff is going on as he finds that everyone in the town he's transported himself to are mutants, mutants, whereas conversely the Nightcrawler seemed to be stripped of all his mutant powers and appearance, making him stand out as a regular dude among thousands of mutants. Yeah, for once it would have actually paid for Kurt to be blue. Kurt was attacked and slain by the people of the village for being different, because even though everything's different, nothing's really changed. Now, moments away from his own demise, Kurt was approached by the demonic Mephisto, who empowered that bitter voice deep down in Kurt's heart, which always tempted him to believe that those hateful and fearful beings he was sworn to protect were not worth the effort. Now imbued with a deep thirst for revenge against the world for treating him like the monster he appeared to be, Kurt was transformed into a demonic entity imbued with demonic powers and false memories that would perpetuate his unrelenting hatred, and manifesting the spitting image of Belasco, the X-Men's former nemesis. In fact, it was revealed that the Nightcrawler had actually been this reality's Belasco all along, thanks in part to a time loop set in motion by Captain America, who refused to deal with Mephisto and some time travel shenanigans. It's even hinted that Belasco's frequent targeting of the X-Men over the years is actually a subconscious cry for help. So this version of Nightcrawler makes for the perfect evil counterpart, as this pure-hearted X-Men had been compensating for his monstrous appearance with genuine kindness and optimism, doing his best to protect a world that hated him. Yet thanks to Mephisto, Kurt was forced into becoming the very thing he feared the most. At number 3 is death. What do you get when you merge Wolverine with the Horsemen of the Apocalypse? You get the Eternal Rest itself. During an Avengers event which saw Kang damage the time stream, something he's prone to do at this point, the Avengers were faced with Apocalypse and his 4 horsemen, all of whom bearing uncannily resemblances to our favorite superheroes. We've got a demonic looking 8-armed, 4-legged Spider-Man as our first horseman, Red Hulk as the Horseman of War, Scarlet Witch with the Black Horse, and finally Wolverine, the Horseman of Eternal Rest. And as for what makes this Wolverine special, aside from the fact that he's permanently fused with a floating horse, is the fact that Wolverine now embodies the very entropy of the universe itself. Well, that is, if he didn't already. At number 2 is the Witness. This alternate reality version of Gambit is himself a temporal anomaly existing at the junction where all timelines converge, thus allowing the Witness to exist at all points in time at once, enabling to perceive everything before it happens, and making for one of the coolest X-Men in the multiverse. Now, being the anomaly that he is, much of his origin is shrouded in mystery. In fact, when Bishop was tasked with gathering as much info on the dude as he could, the only clue we got was him saying, "I am LeBeau." And more than LeBeau, which is about as cryptic as you can get. Now, upon deeper investigation, I discovered that while many assumed the Witness to be an elderly Rami LeBeau, otherwise known as Gambit, it was revealed in the X-Men Future History Messiah War sourcebook, holy cow, what a mouthful, that the Witness was actually a different person altogether, a conclusion that I personally reject. I mean, come on, you're telling me that the Witness, the last guy to ever see the X-Men alive, whose name is LeBeau, isn't actually Gambit? Like, they both even shared the same Cajun accent, for crying out loud. Now, this could be explained by a flashback where we see a 6-year-old Remy running into the Witness by chance, who became somewhat of Remy's mentor. But that doesn't really eliminate the possibility of these two being one and the same, since the Witness is a time traveler after all. There's also that time in Gambit issue number 10 when Gambit is on their hunt for a special jewel with temporal properties, an artifact which is revealed to be sent to Gambit backwards through time by the Witness himself. Bishop at one point even refers to the Witness as Gambit to his face, a name that the Witness does not deny owning, instead simply replying by calling Bishop Mon Ami. And if you're still not happy with my anti-canonical reasoning, too bad. At number 1, we have the Rex Dogs. If you've got a problem, let me remind you that this list calls for better X-Men, and if you believe that the universe where anthropomorphic canines exist in the place of humans is somehow inferior to the X-Men, then you must be a cat person. You see, the Rex Dogs are leagues better than their human counterparts on numerous fronts. Firstly, the original X-Men are prone to fight amongst themselves, like how Wolverine and Cyclops stick together about as well as two repelling magnets, whereas the Rex Dogs take loyalty to a whole new level. In terms of combat, the X-Men are strictly known for their heroic accomplishments, while on the other hand, not only are the Rex Dogs unafraid of getting their paws dirty, they're also adorable while doing it. Guys, let's face it, it's hard not to love these mutant doggies. The only thing that the X-Men have on the Rex Dogs is opposable thumbs, which are definitely overrated. I mean, come on, Professor Rex is a disabled telepathic chihuahua, for crying out loud. At number 10, we have Cyclops, aka Basilisk. This alternate Cyclops from the Age of X Alpha storyline is so intimidating that you might mistake him for a supervillain. With a backstory so dark, it'll leave you wondering how he didn't become one. It all began at the age of 14 when his powers activated without warning while he was in a movie theater, liquefying 7 people including his parents. Scott was incarcerated thereafter, eventually being transferred to Alcatraz after the Emergency Power Act rendered the prison a mutants-only facility, where he caught the attention of Arcade, who's got quite the name for a prison governor. It was thanks to Arcade that we get this epic mask, complete with ruby quartz lenses in the eye holes to inhibit Scotty's eye lasers, and a remote control mechanism that has the mask open down the middle, enabling the beams to pass through. In fact, Arcade had Scotty's eyelids surgically removed in order to prevent him from shutting off his eye beams by himself, so that he could use Scott against his will as an execution method for the other mutant inmates. And after several years of this, Scott managed to get a hold of the remote and blasted his way out of the prison, freeing the remaining mutants and vaporizing Arcade. And before you ask, no, the Basilisk does not turn people to stone with his gaze. He turns them to ash. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. And without further ado, let's get into number 9. Doctor Strange Fate. Ah yes, the good old DC vs Marvel comics. The series that not only pit all of our favorite heroes against one another despite their conflicting franchises, but did so while introducing amalgamations of our favorite heroes and villains. One such hero was the amalgamation of Charles Xavier, Doctor Strange, and DC's Doctor Fate, but as it turns out, this convoluted mashup of a character is more than just a one-hit wonder. See, Strange Fate had discovered that restoring the Marvel and DC universes would result in the destruction of his own amalgam universe, and so he did everything that he could to try and prevent it, which, judging by the fact that you've probably never heard of this dude, was a task that he ultimately failed. However, while he couldn't prevent the destruction of his reality, he decided that he could at least save his own tail, and he did so by infusing his own psyche deep within that of Doctor Strange, where he was able to subtly manipulate the Sorcerer Supreme into creating several cross-dimensional incursions, but ultimately his existence was discovered by Batman and Access. And so, instead of just erasing the dude, Strange decides to preserve the entire amalgam universe within a pocket dimension, thus ensuring that Strange Fate would never be able to menace with the Marvel or DC universes again. At number 8, we have Jean Grey the Conqueror. We all know Marvel just loves to introduce super cool takes on our favorite characters and then proceed to do absolutely nothing with them. I'm looking at you, Galactus Buster Armor, and no missed opportunity makes me as sad as this entry does, cause in the all-new X-Men number 25, we're briefly told about numerous dark realities which don't end very well for our X-Men, including an alternate reality in which Jean Grey was consumed by her inner darkness and went on to conquer the planet by force. You see, a couple realities next door, and Jean Grey ain't the telepathic sweetheart we all know and love, on account of the fact that her early formative years were not spent with Charles Xavier, who was to teach her how to control her powers and to help her mold her persona, thus putting her in touch with her humanity. Instead, the Jean of this earth listened to Magneto, who taught her how it was a mutant's birthright to conquer, leading her to decide that the reason she was born with her powers was just that. And I don't know about you, but I definitely need the whole story which takes place in this reality. Marvel, if you're listening, get on it.
Number 7. Charles Xavier II. Charles Xavier II is the son of Charles Xavier and Mystique, if you can believe that. I know, it's pretty shocking. Charles Xavier number 2 was technically born into the reality of Earth 616, where we later find out that while Mystique actually took the form of Moira when giving birth, Charles actually knew that he was in a relationship with Raven, so it wasn't like a trick of hers, they were actually just wanted to be together, I guess. This version of Charles, however, is an all grown up one from the alternate future of Earth 13729. When his powers first manifested, he accidentally killed his adoptive mother and ended up later joining forces with his half-brother Raze, another child of Mystique's sired by Wolverine, another child of the X-Men. Charles Xavier II has a brilliant and conniving mind, and like his father, is an immensely gifted telepath, capable of using his powers to bend others to his will. Number 6. Polaris. Polaris is the daughter of Magneto, and while you might not think of Magneto as being an X-Men, considering, you know, he started out as an X-Men villain, he has also worked with the team before and even served as a member himself. Heck, at one point he was in charge of the whole New Mutants crew, let's not forget that. Magneto may have some questionable methods when it comes to getting justice that put him on the spectrum of villain, but I think at the end of the day, he's just trying to do what's best for mutants. Or at least what he thinks is best for mutant kind. Polaris, like her father, also has magnetic-based powers, which, like her father, are also pretty impressive. Polaris is considered an alpha-level mutant and recently got to join the X-Men team herself after being elected to join them in the Krakoan X-Men elections. Psychic elections. Imagine if we could all just vote psychically. That would be awesome. That would be so much easier. You would just like sit down and you'd be like, who do I want to vote for? Done. Number 5. Cable. Cable is the son of Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, non-X member Madeline Pryor, who later becomes the villain known as the Goblin Queen, and another X-Man's, Jean Grey, who kind of becomes like an adoptive mother but who also possesses Madeline's memories of raising baby Christopher. Because comics. Cable is Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, often referred to as just Nathan Summers or really just Cable, although back in the day we did know him as Baby Christopher. Cable as a baby was kidnapped by Apocalypse and infected with the techno-organic virus. This is the only thing that makes him weak-ish, but really he is still amazingly strong as he can even fend off that virus, containing it to one side of his body using his psionic powers. That in and of itself is pretty impressive as the techno-organic virus is generally known for being, well, unstoppable. Even with his psionic powers mainly preoccupied, Cable is still a hard one to beat, as he has so many combatant-based skills that he brings to the table, and he is also an experienced time traveler besides. Number 4. Rachel Summers. Yes, get ready because many of the most powerful X-Kids out there just happen to be Summers related, so yeah, get ready for that. Honestly, I've always wanted to do a video just to explain the complicated nature that is the Summers and Grey family tree, which honestly is a lot, and it's very timey-wimey. Rachel herself is one of those very complex kids of theirs. She is the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers from the alternate Earth of 811. In that reality, she was made into a hound, a weapon used to hunt down mutants, even being one herself. Rachel is an extremely powerful telepath and telekinetic who also has the ability to chronoskim and manipulate time, even traveling through it. Rachel is also known for being an avatar of the Phoenix, at one time actually considered the true avatar for it, but then later having the power sort of dialed down to a mere echo of it. So she was no longer the true avatar, they were just like, you just have a thing, and it's not even like the real Phoenix Force, but it's like a version of it. Still, the seeming piece or echo of the Phoenix Force that resides within her has been known to flare up from time to time, or her connection to the Phoenix Force, however we want to see that, occasionally boosting Rachel to an off-the-charts level of power. But like I said, that doesn't happen all the time. Number 3. Hope Summers. Hope is the adopted daughter of Cable, who was originally known as the Mutant Messiah Baby. Cable saved Hope from Bishop, who basically wanted to destroy her. In Bishop's reality, the Mutant Messiah would end up causing the event that led to the oppression and persecution of mutants. However, in Cable's reality, the Mutant Messiah would grow up to become a savior, so you can see why these two were opposed on this topic. For the X-Men of Earth 616, the Mutant Messiah was the first new mutant to have been born since basically M-Day, and so she brought hope to the mutants of the 616 reality. Cable body slided with Hope to another time to raise her in safety. He would end up naming Hope after her adoptive mother, his love who died, Hope, and she got the Summers name from Cable himself. But although she looks a lot like Jean, she actually has no biological relation to the Summers or the Grey families, at least not that we know of. Hope's mutant abilities allow her to copy the powers of anyone within a certain range. Hope also gains access to these powers without struggling at all to use them, receiving them basically at their peak level and with the auto knowledge basically of how to use them. So if you're like, oh, she's gotta like figure it out, no, she's just like instant god mode with those powers basically. Number 2. Scarlet Witch. Wanda is known for being one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. She has used her powers to completely warp reality the world over, and her chaos magic has pulled off other immensely world-changing feats, such as flipping the alignment of all major heroes and villains in the comics during the events of Axis. Initially, her chaos magic powers were believed to be somewhat mutant in origin. In fact, they were kind of presented initially as like Jinx-like mystical mutant abilities during her first appearances. However, we've since learned that both Wanda and her superpowered brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver, were never really mutants at all, nor were they related to Magneto. However, they still spent a good amount of their life around Magneto, who secretly believed them to be his children, and then another good amount of time thinking that he was their actual father, until it was revealed that this was all due to manipulation by the High Evolutionary. High Evolutionary just coming in and messing pretty much everybody up when it comes to their backstories and origins. Wanda herself has never really gotten along with the X-Men, especially since the events of M-Day, but she is still considered, I think, a part of Magneto's family, and a powerful one at that, regardless of her status as a mutant or a non-mutant. I know there are some people out there that want to be like, it never happened, but like, they still spent a lot of time together thinking that they were family, so I think we can still count it, friends. Also, make Wanda a mutant again. Do it. Make it happen. Give me, Wanda, and Quicksilver back. Number 1. X-Man. X-Man is Nathaniel Gray, the lab-born child made by combining the genetic materials of both Jean Grey and Cyclops. So basically like Cable, but if he had been made perfectly by villain Mr. Sinister. He actually hails from the alternate reality of AOA, Age of Apocalypse, Earth 295. Here, Sinister created him to use as his own weapon, but of course, Nate being so powerful, managed to escape Sinister and instead ended up being raised by Forge of Earth 295. He is considered one of the most powerful mutants of all time, which would also make him one of the most powerful children of the X-Men out there. Nate can warp reality, resurrect the dead, resurrect himself, travel to alternate Earths and dimensions, and even manipulate the time stream. He's basically the most OP of characters when it comes to the Marvel Universe. And if you've seen artwork of him, you will probably recognize him as someone who looks like Mutant Jesus, which yes, he is god level, so that is the point.